nothing like it, you'll agree.
I'd like to introduce this programme about on the buses. I'd like to, but I hate to. I'm happy when I hate to. They wanted to get that big twit, that Stephen Lewis, to play this part, but they decided that he was far too ugly. So they got me instead. Right, it's all about on the buses. And no laughter, please. No laughter. I hate laughter. I like to spread misery and gloom. If I can spread misery and gloom, it makes me happy instead, see? Right, and no laughter. No laughter, mate. I'll have you. I'll have you.
Welcome along to Film Talk Improv. And I'm delighted that we've got Morris. I have no idea what we're going to talk about, except it might be related to On the Buses, which was made here at Elm Street.
Well, the television series were made for London Weekend Television. But what you used to get in those days, late 60s and into the 70s, if a show was very popular on television, they would see if they could eke out some money out of it by producing a big screen version. So they did On the Buses. They did make an On the Buses film here in 1971. In fact, they made a trilogy. A trilogy, no less, of bus films.
They did.
You wait for one bus film to come along.
And
then three came along over 3 years. But yes, so they made one here in 1971.
And that was the first. That was the first of the three.
Yeah, it was called On the Buses.
On the Buses, and there was Mutiny on the Buses, then Holiday
on the Buses. I mean, they were really sort of eking it out by then. But what was interesting about On the Buses was that it was the producer, Roy Skeggs. He was a Hammer horror producer. And he was called in by the bosses, and he said, so we've got this idea, we want to start making some comedy versions of big screen. He went, oh, yes. He said, and the first one's going to be On the Buses. He went, oh, yes. And he said, we want you to make it. He went, oh, no, I'm not doing that. He said, well, it's up to you, mate. If you want to stay at Hammer, you've got to make them. Went, oh, right. So Roy Skeggs became the executive producer.
My first budget was nearly 100,000. And the powers that be said, too expensive. So I cut a week off the schedule, went from 5 weeks to 4 weeks shooting, knocked it down to £80,000. We were talking to Bob Kellett, the director at the time. And I said, this week off the schedule, Bob, and he said, goodbye. So Harry Booth came in, who was used to shooting rapidly, and we shot it bang on 4 weeks the schedule. And we came in £900 under budget. But Harry Booth was a television director, and we shot it on television format. Okay, we used 35mm colour and all the normal things for feature film. But I said to him, let's do an extended television show, which we did. And it turned out to be a fine feature film.
It was made for next to nothing. I think it was like 75, 80 grand. It was actually next to nothing. Reg Varney, who by then was 55, had a heart attack. And they couldn't get any insurance for him to make the film. They thought, for that kind of money, they'll take the risk. So you've got this guy, this 55-year-old guy. He learned to drive, it was either HGVs, but he had a licence that allowed him, as a consequence of training, to drive buses. What was going on in the early 1970s, a period of unrest in the country, trade union issues, the lights going out, 3-day week, power cuts, etc. And so the studios had generators that they could use to make films, well, for the lighting, etc. But they couldn't accommodate all the films that were being made at the time. On the other stage, you've got Frankie Howerd making Up Pompeii, the big screen version of the small screen hit. Well, the difficulty is that's a period drama, period comedy, so they needed to be on a stage. So what Roy Skeggs and the director worked out was, if Reg Varney could drive a bus, which he could, they would put lights and they would put actors and they put all the props and all the cast and crew on the bus. And whenever it was light, they'd drive into a part of Boreham Wood and they'd film it on location and use natural daylight. Yep. Absolutely true. Reg Varney told me this. Absolutely true. He said that's why so much of the film was done out and about, literally in local streets here in Boreham Wood, because it meant that they couldn't use the studio, so they had to do it out there on location in Boreham Wood.
Driving the bus around the street was no problem whatsoever. And I had to go on skid pan. That's why they give me the certificate. It's a certain place over at Acton, and when you're driving around, they turn the water on, and you have to put your foot on the brake. Well, first of all, there's an expert behind you on the floor, and you mustn't touch the brake yourself. She said, don't touch the foot brake, whatever you do. And he said, no, I want you to put your foot down, and when you turn around like that. And he said, oh, come on. And went round, no, he said, that's no good. And eventually he got me up to speed, and as I was turning around, he pulled this, and the bus went, oh God, I wonder where I was.
Yes, Reg needed to learn to drive the bus, and we got him to drive it. A nice man came in, and he learned within a week. He was fine, and we found that with that capacity, we could stick all the props and the lighting, everything on the bus, and Reg would drive it to the location, and we'd unload the equipment and put on the passengers. Wonderful locations were Bournemouth High Street, Manaway, Bournemouth, something else, Bournemouth. Everything was shot in Bournemouth, within 1 mile of the studio.
It turned out to be, though, one of the biggest grossing movies of the year. Did it not?
Well, it was quite extraordinary. Anna Karen said to me that they did like a premiere, I think it was off the Edgware Road, late at night, because everyone thought it was going to be absolutely dreadful. And she said she stood at the back there with Reg, and all they could hear was laughter. And they thought, well, they're a bit surprised at that. So they put it out there. And this film, which was made, as I say, for just under 80 grand, grossed $1 million. It grossed 12 times that, yes, and this is 1971, 12 times what it cost to make. It did better in the UK than that year's Bond, which was Diamonds Are Forever.
Wow.
Reg said to me...
But it wasn't a brilliant Bond, let's be honest.
No.
But even so...
But we're talking, yeah, fine. I mean, everyone can be a film critic, but the reality is, when you look at it in those terms, but Reg said to me, one of the reasons why it did so well, it was a very, very wet summer. And so lots of people that were at the holiday camps and went out on holiday in the UK, because don't forget, they weren't going abroad in those days. Most people in the UK, they just went to see something in the cinema, and because it was an A certificate, most people went to see it, and it did remarkably well. But if you look at it now, I mean, you're talking about, as I said, actors in their 50s, and you've got sort of young, pretty young things. One of them is the actress Linda Regan, who's actually also writes books. She's married to Brian Murphy. She was in Heidi High. She played April. But in very early days, she was doing early parts. She was about 16, 17, walking up the stairs, showing her legs and a bit of backside and stuff. And they're going, cool, that kind of stuff. You take a step back now and you think, these guys are in their 50s. Do you know what I mean? But I think one shouldn't overanalyse what was going on in those days, other than to say that, thankfully, A, it's different now, but B, it was an extraordinary success. So much so that while they're making all the episodes for London Weekend Television, and they made over 70 in about 3 or 4 years, they were just churning it out, the writers, Ronald Wolfe and Ronald Chesney. They made another 2 films. So they made Mutiny on the Buses, which also was filmed mainly at Elstree, and then Holiday on the Buses. I think Mutiny, one of them also was filmed at the Windsor Safari Park, which is no longer Safari Park. And then they did Holiday on the Buses, and they took it off to a Pontins holiday camp in Wales. And poor Stephen Lewis, before he was filming, had an accident and broke his foot. And he was all in a cast, so they had to write it into the script. If you see him, they had to pretend that they'd run him over, so that he had a cast on because it was playing it in a cast. He said it was terribly uncomfortable. But these made these 3 films, and an On the Buses trilogy that was made. So that was made at Elstree. Did remarkably well.
Doris here was most magnificent mum, and she used all the mum words. If I said anything a little bit suggestive, not awful, Stan, not any of that talk here, she was marvellous.
The minute you put the dark wig on and you parted in the middle, I looked like the person I was imitating as Olive, because I based Olive on a member of my family. And so I copied the hairstyle and everything. And that hairstyle is a killer for me. Even now, today, when the fashion is straight hair, I can't wear it, because I immediately look like Olive.
Anna Canry played my sister. She was a natural, but they didn't give her much to say in the beginning, because they weren't sure she looked exactly what they wanted, because they made her up with that dreadful hair, the wig they put on her and that sort of thing. And even that Arthur and things like that, so she did it so well, they built a part up as she went along, and it became a real family.
I mean, Reg had quite an astonishing career, though, didn't he? Quite a diverse career, Reg Varney.
Yeah. I mean, Reg Varney didn't just turn up at the last minute. I mean, yes, he'd done a lot of television comedy, Beggar My Neighbour, The Rag Trade, on the buses. I mean, by then he was very highly paid. I mean, the guy was more or less retired in the early 70s after he'd done that. He retired from television, and he lived to 93. And when I visited him in the late 80s, he was living down in Devon, you know, and he'd had a comfortable life as a consequence of all he'd done. But he'd been on the sort of the stage doing the music hall, etc. He'd had a really good upbringing in the arts, and he was a very talented musician. He could play the piano, so he really knew his stuff. The cast itself for On the Buses, as you know, a few stereotypical characters, and you've got Stephen Lewis with his, oh my God, he's Inspector, oh my God, I hate you, Butler, and oh my God, and he did that character all the way through On the Buses. He did it all the way through Dr. Beeching, and all the way through Last of the Summer Wine, effectively Smiler, but effectively the same character goes, oh my God, miserable as sin.
Oh yes, it was so enjoyable, the whole thing, you know. It's a marvellous experience. As I say, we had so many laughs behind the cameras, you know, that were happening to us. Some of it was unpleasantness, as I said, at different times, you know, like getting all that water in my face when I was standing there at the bus stop in a big puddle. What you have to do to get a laugh.
He was a writer. He wrote Sparrows Can't Sing, the famous Joan Littlewood drama.
With Roy Kinnear.
With Roy Kinnear in the early 60s, Barbara Windsor. He was a lifelong socialist, and he was a lifelong writer. And so you tend to think he plays this one character. And I said to him, look, aren't you kind of a bit fed up that after all these years people go, oh my God, I hate you, and can you just do that? And he said, you know what? He says, if I'm remembered for making people laugh and bringing joy to people, I don't mind.
I mean, it's lovely to be able to make people laugh in a world that's full of misery and awful things happening on the news all the time, you know, and yet we can make them forget. I realised that when I was doing pantomime. I think I've done about 26 years of pantomime altogether, you know, over here. And I was at some place there, and I was just waiting to go on again the second time. And I suddenly thought to myself, like, you know, different things, and I thought, there must be a good percentage of the audience out there who have got some problems in life, you know, maybe about 10% of them. Every night. And if you can make them forget for a couple of hours like that, it's a marvellous thing for them, and I'm sure it is. And that's to me, that's why I used to do a lot of drama when I first went into the theatre, but I stopped doing that and went in for comedy. I think it's medicine to the people.
He came and visited Elstree here in the late 1990s to do an interview. And he said to me, he said, I brought a costume. I said, you brought what costume? He said, I bought my inspector's costume. I said, have you? He said, yeah, in case you want me to dress up. And I said, well, why not? It wasn't part of anything. But I thought, yes, I did an interview because at the time I was thinking about doing a documentary on the buses. So we interviewed him I think it was actually in here. It might have been in here. In his, whatever it was, he's wearing a jacket, a multicoloured jacket and everything. And then afterwards, he puts on his inspector's outfit and his moustache. And he goes around going, oh, Michael, get that bus out, get that out. And he's doing the... But he loved it, and everyone just looked at him. And this was like 25 years on, and everyone just loved it.
Hi, sir, can I help you? Yes, I've come to work on a programme about on the buses.
Okay, can I take your name, please, sir?
You don't know who I am?
No, sorry, sir. Just your name, please, and I'll be able to find it minutes for you.
Inspector Blake.
Sorry, sir. I'll just have a look for you.
You don't know?
We've got a Stephen Lewis.
Stephen Lewis? What, that ugly twit? Go up, Inspector... Oh, get out of it. Oh, God. I'll get you.
It was really great. I felt really happy for him that he felt so happy and that he was able to make a career. Obviously, Bob Grant, sadly, had a sad end. He got very depressed. Life wasn't so good for him in the business, and he committed suicide. And Anna Karen became, of course, a big established name, not just in On the Buses, but other comedy too, and then went on to do EastEnders. So, by and large, they all did okay, other than Bob Grant. But as I say, you look back at it now, and it's probably not the best of humour. I remember speaking to Ronald Wolf's wife. They were prestigious. They were prodigious in the amount of material they used to produce. I mean, the number of sitcoms that they did. And some of them, you know, Meet the Wife with Thor Hurd and Freddie Frinton. You know, some of this stuff was really good, some of them wasn't. And she, and I should choose my words carefully, being filmed, so she said they did make an awful lot of crap. She didn't use the word crap, and we were talking in their very nice big home in Golders Green, and I think she kind of accepted that the style of life that they had was as a consequence of the payments that they got for the work that they did, but she didn't want anyone to think that it was all classics, because it wasn't. However, when you take a show like On the Buses, and it's getting 14, 15 million viewers a week, and it makes people laugh, you think to yourself, that can't be bad. People that would kill to make nowadays shows that had those kind of ratings. So of their time, these were very big shows, and the films of their time were very big films.
You stupid nit! I can't get out!
Can't you? Try driving the bus sideways.
I'll get you for this!
Hammer, as I've said, were going not so much away from horror, but knew that horror only has so much life in it, or death in it, I suppose. And so while they were making some Hammer horror films, they were making Hammer Presents British film comedies of television sitcom hits, and we made lots and lots of them here.
Bit of a last laugh for Hammer, though, wasn't it? Really, they were struggling by the end of the 70s. And
well, they were, but
went out of business.
It's that old line about comedy is a serious business, and it was. I mean, it helped keep them going. Like, to a certain extent, the Carry-Ons and the Norman Wisdom films and the Doctor films kept the Rank organisation going. Everyone thinks that Bond came along in the early 60s and helped save Pinewood. Bond was part of it, but of course you already had the Doctors being made from the 50s, Carry-Ons from the late 50s, Norman Wisdom from the 50s. And those types of films, when in the days when film studios were making their own films, so it was a Rank film, any money came in to help Rank, it helped keep Pinewood afloat. So comedy, we laugh, but comedy generally can be a very serious business, not just for producers, but for the film studios, particularly of those days.
Excellent. So there we are. We talked about On the Buses, bit of improv for Film Talk, but I'm sure we could talk about many other subjects. But Maurice, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Always welcome.